Hello, everyone, and welcome to my doctoral recital on flow and practice. My name is Evgenia Rabinovich, and I am so excited to have all of you joining me here today to hear all about my study findings and what I've been up to for the last 2 years of my research. So I will be presenting to you today my study on flow and piano performance, and the full name of the study is Fostering Flow in Piano Performance Through Effective Practice. Now, I am a performing pianist myself. I am also a teacher and a co-founder of RR Academy, which is a performance school for young musicians here in Vancouver. And I am particularly passionate about this topic because it's always a goal of mine to help students experience the most positive kind of performance that they can achieve. And that has really fueled my interest in this topic and the research that you are about to see. So let's get into it. What is flow? Well, flow is a concept introduced by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who is a psychologist. And here he is. He has termed flow this mental state that involves complete involvement in an activity. And this mental psychological state is something that is achievable in many different ways, but there are specific things that help you get there and that are required for you to get there. Now let's unpack flow a little bit more. You can have a look yourself in Csikszentmihalyi's book on flow, and I recommend that everybody gets a copy. He discusses this in quite a bit of detail, talking a lot about how people experience this in their everyday lives as well as in performance. What is flow? Well, flow is, like I said, a psychological state which is associated with intense engagement and enjoyment, a deep sense of focus and concentration, and a sense of complete immersion in the activity that you are participating in. How do these things happen then? How does flow happen? Well, it occurs during optimal experiences. So flow is achieved when a person is involved or engaged in these optimal experiences, which brings us to the question of what are optimal experiences? Well, optimal experiences described by Csikszentmihalyi are experiences that depend on the ability to control of what happens in consciousness, moment by moment. Each person has to achieve it on the basis of their own individual efforts and creativity. And this is a quote from the book that you had previously seen up on the screen. How are these optimal experiences achieved, and what are they? Well, what they are very special types of experiences that have a particular balance within them. And we're going to get to this balance in a minute, but I'm sharing a photo of one of my favorite flow experiences, which is mountain biking. My husband and I love to mountain bike on the North Shore, and for me, it's something that really gets me in the zone and makes me feel flow. These optimal experiences tend to be challenging, so that's one reason I've got mountain biking up here. If you know anything about mountain biking or biking in general, you'll know that this is not an easy activity to engage in. But it is deeply enjoyable, and it brings about a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. However, it demands high skills, and this is a very important point because we're going to get to this idea of challenge and skill balance next, which is the fundamental condition that you need for all this to happen. Now, that balance still provides you with room to grow, so you're not stuck. You're not in a situation where you feel like there's nothing left for you to achieve, or that you've already achieved everything out there. Again, many prior researchers have looked at these experiences in sports, and so you see a lot of research on flow in sports psychology and in the ideas that these psychologists implement to elicit optimal performance among athletes. Now, the fundamental thing that's necessary for all this to happen is the challenge-skill balance that I had mentioned previously. What is the challenge-skill balance? It is this idea that things cannot be neither too difficult nor too easy for you to achieve flow. And Csikszentmihalyi created a very useful chart that demonstrates this. I will leave this up for a second so you can have a look. Effectively, he calls it the flow channel. And he says that flow states occur under certain specific circumstances. So some of the circumstances are that there is a challenge-skill balance, and this challenge-skill balance is essential because if the challenge is too high and the skills are too low, you are going to experience anxiety. And that's what you see up there in the upper section of this chart. However, if the challenge is too low and your skills are too high, then you're going to experience boredom. And none of these things are good. You will not experience a positive flowing performance experience unless you've got this challenge-skill balance in check. So why do we care about all this? Why do we care about flow? Well, people in flow report feeling a lot more motivated to do activities. This is a big benefit because we want people to engage in these optimal activities and achieve big things. They also report feeling more satisfied. So there's a feeling of achievement that is intrinsic and internal to a sense of joy. Likewise, they are more relaxed during these experiences, which is a big benefit because, again, these are challenging activities and we want to be performing at our best. And as a result, they are more fulfilled with their work. So you end up with people who are happier and would like to continue doing what they're doing, which is, of course, what we would like to see from performers. All of this leads to a loss of self-consciousness and a lack of performance anxiety. So there is a correlation between experiences of flow and less performance anxiety on stage and in auditions, as you will hear shortly. So how do we create flow? Well, we have to have certain conditions, which I mentioned before. And so the very first condition is having challenge-skill balance. You must also, however, have clearly defined goals. This is very important. If you don't know what you're trying to do, you will not be able to achieve it. To do that thing that you want to do, you need to have an ordered process. So an ordered process means that you've got to have a specific list of tasks that you are going to engage in to help you achieve that end result, that goal. That ordered process that you are engaged in has to have no interruptions. So it's very important that you are not distracted. Now, how these distractions are managed, it's a little bit more complex, and we'll get into that later on. And of course, you must meet several specific conditions. So what are these conditions that you need to meet to achieve results? We're going to get into that now. Csikszentmihalyi mentions 9 conditions for flow. Depending on who you read and who you talk to, you will see that the 9th condition is one that is a little bit more complex, and we'll get to that when we see it. It has to do a little bit with personality, so you're going to see that shortly. So the 9 fundamental conditions, of them, the first is challenge and skill balance, which was previously mentioned. Then merging of action and awareness. What does that mean? That means that you have to be deeply aware of what you're doing, and at the same time, you are making a kind of aware judgment of what you're doing, but without passing judgment on yourself. So you are clearly engaged in the task and responding to the stimuli that the task is presenting, as opposed to judging yourself somehow and saying, oh, that was good, that was bad. You're not doing that, you are reacting in the moment. Of course, to react appropriately, you must have clear goals. And those clear goals have to be accompanied by unambiguous feedback. So what is unambiguous feedback? Unambiguous feedback means that you are going to know what the next step is for you to achieve what it is you want to achieve. And you are clearly receiving some sort of feedback that you are processing and making, again, a judgment for yourself of which way do I need to go with this activity to get to that end goal. All of this requires concentration on the task and a sense of control, so that as you're working through this, as you're engaged in that activity, you don't feel powerless, but rather you feel that you have the ability to motivate that activity and move it forward in the direction you need. As a result of all of these things coming together, you will often experience a loss of self-consciousness. And along with that, a distorted sense of time. So what you will hear people say, when they experience flow is that they don't know how much time has passed. It might be too little, it might be a lot. Sometimes time passes faster, sometimes time passes slower, so it's dependent on the person, but regardless, you're not keeping your eye on the clock. And all of this leads to the 9th condition, which is autotelic experience. Autotelic experience is doing something for the sake of joy, for its own sake, just because it brings something positive to you. But as I mentioned before, this is also associated with autotelic personality, this idea that there are some people who are motivated by the activity as opposed to by social factors. and social judgments. And the people who are more likely to experience flow will be the ones who are autotelic personalities, as Csikszentmihalyi calls them, and they are more internally motivated. So where does practice fit in? Well, increased practice is associated with improved flow. So we know that the more you practice, the more likely you will flow. And certain types of practice techniques are essential for achieving peak performance. Now, prior researchers have referred to these as techniques, and they have grouped them all together kind of non-discriminately. As a result, we have some missing information that we need to fill in, and that's where my study comes in. One thing we know about practice, and about the kind of practice that makes flow possible, is deliberate practice. So what is deliberate practice? This is another theory that's proposed by Erickson, Kramp, and Techromer, and what they talk about is this idea that expert performance is achieved through a specific type of practice. So it's not just practicing, it's not just sitting down and getting it done, it's something specific that you're doing. So what kind of practice is this deliberate practice? It is prolonged. Usually it takes years. It takes a certain commitment, level of commitment, to continue this type of deliberate practice to achieve the results that you're after. This type of practice is also consistently organized. So what that means is you will have, again, that ordered process that was previously mentioned, but you have created out of it an order that you follow. You follow that order in a focused manner. Again, you see some overlap with flow theory here. And this practice activity is extremely goal-oriented. But keep in mind, you've got this specific list of tasks that you're doing to get into the goal that you, or to achieve the goal that you have set out for yourself. As a result, what you're doing is you're engaging in intentional practice. You are not just practicing for the sake of sitting there and repeating things. You're not practicing just because you have to. You're practicing with a specific intention in mind to achieve a goal that you have set out the steps towards and organized in a specific manner. So what has been studied about this? Well, we know about flow in music in general. We know about how musicians practice in general. People have looked into this. They know what different instrumentalists do. Many studies look at combinations of musicians where you have oboists, singers, maybe one pianist and a conductor all interviewed about the different ways in which they practice. Now, for those of you who are pianists in the room, or even for those of you who are other types of musicians, you might recognize that that is quite a silly thing to do. So if you're an instrumentalist and you are playing the oboe, you probably don't care too much about how specifically a pianist approaches Chopin's Third Ballade. You might want to know what they're doing in the practice room, but you don't really need to know exactly how it is they are practicing this specific passage unless you can apply it to your own instrument. So when you're seeing research done on general instruments and it's grouped all together, there's of course the problem of whether or not it is transferable to your specific instrument and whether or not we can make group generalizations. We do know a little bit about flow and piano performance, but we don't know how people get there. We have documented experiences that pianists have had, times that they've talked about flow, and prior researchers have mentioned this, but they haven't really looked at how exactly pianists practice. And we also know a little bit about how pianists in general prepare for performances, so a little bit about their performance habits and preferences, but again, not exactly how they put it all together. One thing that we know from a prior researcher named Lindsay Key is that frequent flow predicts frequent practice. There's a correlation between them, so if you are frequently in flow, you are more likely to practice. Now, you might remember I had mentioned that if you practice quite often, you will more frequently experience flow, so this correlation goes both ways. Flow in practice is also associated with less anxiety in auditions. So again, this comes back to this idea of being more centered, more focused, and more happy with what you're doing. We also know some interesting things, that high achievers are more likely to experience flow, and pushing moderate achievers is not going to help them experience flow, but will push them further away from it. So this relates back to this idea of the challenge-skill balance, because if your challenge is significantly higher than your skills, you're going to feel anxiety and you're not going to achieve flow. One researcher, Gregory Wang, who was a fellow DMA student, had said that in his study he was able to uncover that optimal performance experience is not a magical blessing endowed upon us by the gods of recitals, but something that can be prepared by adequate practice. And I thought this was fun to share because we all know musicians and friends who've said, oh, I didn't practice at all before this, and it just went well, and it was great. And there is kind of this question that people have of, well, is it all talent? And my study started to look a little bit at, well, clearly it isn't. Clearly there are things we do. Let's look at exactly what we do. So what's been missed is how exactly do pianists practice to help achieve this optimal performance, and this is why we are all here today. So I had a hypothesis, I had an idea, and my idea was that pianists use specific practice methods to achieve optimal performance. Conversely, when they are not using structured practice and not making use of any practice methods, they are achieving suboptimal performance. So they are not achieving optimal performance. They get suboptimal results. Now, to test this, here's what I did. I looked at prior research. I interviewed students about how they practice specifically. And I interviewed teachers about how they ask their students to practice. Now, the students who I interviewed were students of Nicholas Rada. Nicholas Rada is here in the audience with us today. Thank you for being here, Nicholas. He is my husband and better half, and he is also a teacher and a pianist and performer in Vancouver. And his students were chosen for a specific group of reasons, but I'll talk a little bit about him first. So he is the primary teacher in the study, and he is a pianist who has a Bachelor of Music from Purchase and a Master of Music from UBC. He had previously studied with Dr. Sasha Starcevich and Dr. Sarah Davis-Buchner, and these were the two teachers who primarily influenced him, although there are many others who also played a big role in his life. He has many accolades and achievements which are up here. So he's played with many international orchestras. He's also, he grew up playing violin, so he also performed with a VYSO and VSO as a soloist, as well as with VAM, both as a piano soloist and as a violinist. And for these reasons, among others, he was the primary teacher chosen for this study. Now, the main reason why we chose one teacher, why I chose one teacher, is because I wanted to have a starting off point for terminology. And if you've studied with more than one teacher in your life, you'll know that people talk about things differently. And so it's important, for the sake of this study, to collect a list of practice methods. And to do that, we need to have terms and words that people use. And if we're all over the place, then we can't really compare what people are saying. But in this case, when gathering students from a single studio, you are more likely to get a consistent list of terms that are used among students. And so I looked at one teacher with a particular group of students. And so why this group? Well, they frequently win competitions. They're frequent performers in general. And as competition winners, many of them have been winners of international competitions and big national competitions like CMC. So for this study, I was choosing people who were consistently performing and receiving awards at these competitions. So of this group of students, of Nicholas's students, 20 of them have been CMC finalists and 16 have been either first, second, or third place. All of them receive marks above 90 on their RCM piano performance exams, and all of them are frequently on stage, so we're talking at least 3-4 times a year, if not more. Now, to participate in the study, you needed to be a winner of a competition at least between 2015 and 2024. You needed to have least level 9 RCM piano requirements, and for those of you who don't know, Royal Conservatory of Music is one of the big Canadian institutions that runs piano performance exams, and they run all the way up to ARCT, and it goes 9, 10, and ARCT. So these are students playing senior level repertoire, and senior level repertoire is generally performance repertoire that will be heard at universities and concert halls and major performance venues. Now, to participate, they had to have at least 6 months of lessons with Nicholas Rada in the past 8 years, with a minimum of 10 hours of lessons per student. For teachers participating in this study, I did not just interview Nicholas. I wanted to talk a little bit to other teachers. So I'd chosen past students of Nicholas's who'd moved on to other teachers since working with him. And the purpose of this was to see, well, do people in other studios use the same terms? Do they use practice methods? Do they do things the same way or different ways? And how do the students practice that we interviewed? Do they practice like their past teacher told them, like their current teacher's telling them, a mix of both? We wanted to know all about that. So I interviewed current teachers, and these current teachers had to be current teachers if they were working with students a minimum of 6 months in the past 5-year period and had at least 10 hours of lessons taught. Now, these teachers were recruited by students, so students would ask them if they'd like to participate, and if they agreed, then I spoke to them. Now, how did I run this study? Well, I interviewed participants via Zoom. I did follow-up interviews where needed. I transcribed these interviews, and then after that, the participant data was anonymized, and I looked at the data, analyzing it for recurrent thematic material. I asked students and teachers different questions with a fundamentally similar root. And the questions that I asked were kind of a starting point for conversation. I wanted to get authentic responses from participants without feeding them answers. And to do that, I let the conversation flow naturally. So this was a semi-structured interview. It wasn't a questionnaire, it wasn't a formal interview. It was semi-structured specifically to let people get into it and talk about what matters to them and how they actually experienced it. So what you're gonna be seeing here are sample questions that were used in the study, but oftentimes they were within the context of a greater conversation. So I was asking students, can you describe a typical practice session? Can you tell me how you deal with challenges in your practice sessions? Can you share how you deal with distractions? How do you know if you had a good practice session? And can you share how you practice immediately prior to a performance? Now, when I say these were conversation starters, what I mean is that a lot of the time, students would tell me stories about how they prepare and what they experienced, and one thing would lead to another, and we would get to question number 2 or question number 4 midway through the conversation and pursue that forward. So what you're seeing, again, isn't exactly how each interview went list by list, but rather the starting point of discussion. For teachers, I did the same thing, and I asked them, how do you ask your students to practice? How do you guide them through challenges? How do you help them navigate problem areas in their playing? How do you guide them to stay on task and make sure that they're focused? Do you provide anything for them to help them out? Do you help students understand what needs to be practiced? How do you do that? And can you share how you guide students immediately prior to performances? Now, here's what I ended up with. I ended up with 7 participating students, and these 7 participating students are listed on the chart up in front of you. Now, this table provides the pseudonym of the students on the left, their age, whether they are female or male, the program or school level that they're in, as well as their piano level. So you'll notice that you have 3 participants who are university level students. 2 of them are in their bachelor's at the moment, and 1 is a master's level student. The rest are all high school students who are at the final level of RCM, Royal Conservatory of Music, ARCT, which is the associate diploma. And if you recall me mentioning, it goes 9, 10, ARCT, so just to give you an idea of where they're effectively at the top level of this conservatory. And here are the teachers. So here's something interesting to note. You see 4 columns on the left-hand side, and those are 4 different teachers that I interviewed. However, if you have a look at column number 2, you will see that there are 2 names there, Ethan Westwood and Miles Thornton, who are teachers who teach together. And this is important to mention because they were interviewed as a single unit, since their teaching approach is fundamentally unanimous and is presented as a single unit. They teach together with all students, and so I interviewed them together. I've listed associated students, and you might notice that not all the student names are up here. So one of the things that happened in this study is a lot of teachers were busy, and so I wasn't able to interview every teacher who I had wanted to interview. My goal was to interview every associated current teacher for these students, but that unfortunately was not possible. You can also see the position of the teachers, so what they're doing. 2 of the teachers were professors at universities, and the other 2 teach privately. Now, here are some participant profiles, a little bit of background information about who was in this study. So of the students, you got 7 students. 6 of them are continuing their piano performances. And what I mean by that is they are pursuing, by all accounts, their pianism professionally. So that's clear from the 3 who are at universities, but at least 3 of the other students indicated that they will continue to be performing publicly and pursuing music education at a higher level, particularly in the area of piano performance, with only 1 student saying that they are no longer going to be pursuing piano performance following the interview. So that 1 student was interviewed immediately following a very large performance that they gave of a Mozart piano concerto, and after that they said that they're focusing on pursuing further studies at a university outside of the realm of piano performance. 3 students are currently studying abroad. 2 students play and perform on multiple instruments, and all students are ethnically Chinese. And I think this is important to mention because it's a little bit unusual, but it was something that I anticipated given the student body of Nicola Strata's studio. So we are representing a specific group of people. It's also worth mentioning that 2 of the students are currently dating and romantically involved, which I think is important to say just because when people are in relationships, they talk about things. And so they're more likely to be talking about how they practice, what they're doing, and what works and what doesn't. When it comes to teachers, I interviewed 2 teachers together, and 2 instructors, 3 participating teachers. So you can tell that this includes Ethan and Miles, were local, so they're from Vancouver. Again, this is mentioned primarily so that there's an awareness that this is a specific community of musicians that is interconnected. Again, 2 of the teachers knew each other personally, and all participating teachers are Caucasian. Of course, when I say 2 teachers know each other, I don't mean Miles and Ethan, I mean those 2 along with another teacher know of each other and are frequently in similar circles, engaging with a similar population of people. So, what are my findings? Let's talk about it. What works and what doesn't? Well, the best way to talk about this is to show you what students do. And students use essentially 3 primary ways to prepare for performances. I have named them practice methods, practice approaches, and practice preparation techniques. So what are these? Practice methods are specific behaviors that are used to address problem areas. So these are things that people do in their practice when they have a problem and they want to fix it. Practice approaches are general behaviors used to structure practice. They are a little bit bigger behaviors, so oftentimes you see practice methods fitting inside practice approaches, by which I mean that practice methods are used alongside or in combination with other practice approaches to achieve specific results. You will see this mentioned later on. And then there are performance preparation techniques. So performance preparation techniques are behaviors that people use immediately before performances. And these are quite unique, and so I've devoted a separate section to them, which we will get to. So first we will talk about practice methods, this idea of using specific behaviors. So most often in the case of piano performance, these specific behaviors are specific practices of taking some sort of a piece of music and a small segment of it and applying specific patterns or modifications to that area in order to achieve specific results and fix a problem. So again, what exactly is this? These are exercises that people create by modifying the score. Everyone in this study uses them. And this is an interesting finding that I didn't actually expect because speaking to musicians abroad, and some of my professors were from other places like New York, they are not closely related to this community. So seeing them make use of practice methods and seeing them call some of these practice methods by the same name is significant. Everyone has preferences, so people know of more practice methods than they use. Now again, exactly what these methods are, we're going to get to, but keep in mind that there's a range of them and that their applications are wide. Students are mostly using the methods that they learned in their adolescence. This is important. This was a finding that I didn't anticipate, but it showed that students are mostly applying the things that they learned when they were young teenagers. So sure, they do the things that their current teachers are telling them to do, but they're not doing that as a primary default. They are first starting with other things and then layering on top of that the additional techniques they've been taught after their early adolescence. And again, an interesting finding that was previously mentioned is that many methods have shared names across studios. So you see people referring to these methods in using the same terms. Why are they used? To improve facility, to improve control, particularly in difficult passage work, to practice variety. This is a big one that we're going to continue on with and talk about in a lot more detail. To practice adaptability. This is a really important thing as well, because as we will later learn, being on stage comes with unexpected things happening. And how well you handle them depends on how prepared you are. And to prepare to handle them, you have to have a certain amount, a certain level of adaptability, of ability to just go with the flow, for lack of a better word, and engage as best as you can in what you're doing, given the circumstances, adapting to the situation as is most appropriate. And these methods are used to do that, but they're also used to increase and improve mental flexibility. Altogether, you get students talking about these regularly throughout their interviews without me mentioning them or asking about them directly. So I will provide a few quotes. One is by Polly, who's a female student who's 17 years old. And what she said was, I pick a problem area, and this is in response to me saying, how do you practice? Me asking. So I asked, how do you practice? And she says, I pick a problem area, and then it depends again with a piece, but I would go back and do slow-mo practice. We're gonna get into what that is shortly. Maybe some separate hands, and then some methods, like dotted rhythms, like accenting different notes and stuff, just to get my hands familiar with them. And then I would probably do slow-mo again, and then start building up the speed bit by bit, usually with metronome, and then do hands together, and then just play it regularly, but slow-mo, like how it's meant to be played, but at a slower speed, like half speed, and then just start building speed up. So Polly here is describing just a general practice approach, and a lot of the time when I asked students how they practice, they had an immediate answer that was quite this complex. So oftentimes they would answer something like this, and then go on to elaborate. This is a partial quotation. And they would continue on to explain which methods they use for which areas and in which different ways they implement them. Now you might notice a few interesting things in this quote, and I've bolded them here, or highlighted them rather. Students are doing slow practice. They're doing practice often with metronome, and they're building up speeds. Those are not practice methods, those are practice approaches. But one of the reasons I mentioned practice approaches early on is because these things are connected. And when people are practicing methods, they're doing it in a certain way and along with other activities. So what does Andrea say? Andrea is another female student who's 16, and she said, if it's something technical, I would do methods. So methods would span over a few days, since it doesn't really work with just one day. More specifically, if the music is just not clear, I would do picking and high finger. If it's something like crossover with my hand and I'm missing a note, then I would do something like grouping exercises, and then rhythms methods are used for evenness. Now you see lots of different words up here, and you're gonna see them on the next slide, and this has to do with the different names of these methods that people use. Now, most of the time, we got into the discussion of exactly what each one of these means after the fact, but often students would just show with their hand. So they'd raise it up to the screen and they would show what they're doing, or they would describe it in detail. So what kind of methods did we see? Well, I made a chart for you, and there are two of them, so I will leave them up. This is the first one. The ordering of this is in order from the most frequently used methods to the ones that are less frequently used. On the left-hand side, what you see are the different names for the methods. In the middle, you see a method description summary. You'll see those again, so don't worry about that too much. And on the right-hand side, what you see is the number of musicians. So for the number of musicians, what you're seeing is an S and a T. S stands for number of students who mentioned this method and said that they use it. And T stands for the number of teachers who made use of this method. In the case of the two teachers who were interviewed together, they were counted as separate musicians here, because what I wanted to know was how many people are using these words and having the same reference for them. So 7 students and 4 teachers made use of groupings, which will be shown shortly. 7 total participants, so we're saying 5 students and 2 teachers made use of plucking. 4 students and 1 teacher made use of high finger, and 4 students and 5 teachers made use of rhythms. The methods go on the second table here, where you see finger staccato, blocked or chunk practice, backwards practice, and picking. And you can see the numbers decrease because you see fewer people making use of this or mentioning this. So I will, again, remind you that plucking was something that was mentioned on the previous slide, and this will be discussed and compared to picking later on. And again, you're seeing that at least 2 students are making use of these methods at any given point in time. Now, these practice methods, they are effectively like a toolkit. And the way that I would like you to think of them is like a workman's belt. The same way that a workman's belt cannot be functional for every single thing, it will be used to fix specific tools. The belt will be there and you'll need it, but you might not need every single item in that belt. So when we talk about practice methods, that's what we're referencing. We're saying that it's great if you know all of them. It's great if you have all of them. That's like having a complete workman's belt. But how you use them, that requires some skill, some thought, and a lot of experience. And so this toolkit is applicable to specific things, specific problem areas, and is used in specific ways. And this is what I will be showing to you now. So I will be demonstrating a little segment of Chopin's Etude Opus 10 number 8. I'll just be playing the first page for you, and then what you will be hearing after that is a demonstration of some of my preferred methods for this area. So without further ado, I will be playing the segment, and the score is up here. It's from the Paderewski edition. Please enjoy. I've stopped and just to show you what the different types of approaches I'm going to be using. For the sake of time, I've cut this short. So on the next slide, what you'll be seeing are some of the approaches that I use. Now, the first one is groupings. And groupings practice is done with stops or accents. Now, there's a number of different ways to do this. The way that you want to think about this is that you have multiple groups. So here, it's quite simple. And I'll actually flip back to the previous slide to show you this, because you can see right at the very top of the page that you have one group, another group, another group. So these are groups of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can stop on the first of the group, second of the group, third, or fourth of the group. Now, I'll show a few variations before playing this so you can see. Stopping on the first of the group would look like this. Stopping on the second would be. And stopping on the third will be shown in the next slide. So you can do this on each individual group with stops or with accents. Now with accents would be the same thing, but accenting the note instead of stopping on it. And this is used to improve quick movement. So in this particular etude, you're trying to turn, and this turn can be really awkward. So what you see here is me practicing this. And so the purpose of stopping on the third group here is primarily so that you can practice that turn easier. The next method is picking. And picking and plucking are closely related, but they are slightly different in execution. So picking is a light flicking motion towards the palm of the hand. Effectively, you are pulling your finger forward to the direction of the palm of the hand. And this is done for a brighter, lighter tone. It's somewhat similar to plucking, which you'll see on the next slide, and it's used to improve clarity of touch and attack and release. The purpose of this is to make sure that your fingertip is ready on the key and that each finger is moving with the same kind of dexterity. Next, you will see plucking. Plucking is similar, but it's a little bit more movement, almost more of an aggressive motion with the hand. Some people dislike this method because it can induce forearm tension if used too much or used inappropriately. And the key to this method is to release after each individual pluck. So please have a look at how my hand does this differently here. This is more active than picking. And it's used to improve clarity of touch, and it trains a stronger attack than picking does. So if picking is what I prefer for this etude because it's a little bit lighter, then plucking is and I wanted to demonstrate those two in the hall for you so you could hear a little bit better given the way that the sound reverberates the difference between the two. Rhythms is another really useful method, and this one's quite fun. Effectively imagine this as dotting the note. There are two variations. There's short-long and long-short. Now, the reason for these variations is just so that you're practicing the mental flexibility that is required to execute both in both directions. And this trains coordination, and it helps improve evenness. I will demonstrate both of them, but first you will hear this one, just with the right hand. So this is short, long. Short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. And so the purpose of short, long is to see this, that you are grounding yourself on the second note, which is often skimmed over, so it's very easy to go and do that. And you don't want to be doing that in this etude, so instead of doing that, what you do is you practice stopping effectively on that second note by going short, long, short, long. Now it doesn't have to be that slow. It can be practiced quicker. And then this is going to be long, short. Besides that, there's also finger staccato. Now, finger staccato I will show first. Finger staccato looks more like this. The purpose of doing that is to make sure that each finger is moving actively from the knuckle and has an equal attack and release. The way that you're going to see me do finger staccato here is a backwards finger staccato. So a lot of these methods have variations, And this is one of them. And this variation is sometimes called flicking. And flicking looks a little bit different because instead of going from the top down, lifting the knuckle and throwing it down onto the key, you are starting on the key and you are popping off of the key with an upwards flicking motion. So you're flicking your hand this way. And so here is flicking. It's used for consistency of touch and a lighter sound. Then there is my favorite method to use for this, and this is single double. Single double comes as single double or double single. So again, this is similar to rhythms in the fact that it can be reversed. Now, single double is done where you play the first two notes of the group as single notes, the way they're written, and then you double them up. So it's going to sound like what you hear on the screen, and then I will show you double single. Now the purpose of this is, in this case especially, to turn. And double single helps, I think, a little bit more. It helps with that turn, with the coordination, and it isolates certain areas of the hand that have trouble with control because you are having to move them twice as fast as you normally otherwise would. Now you're hearing me demonstrate these physically now with both hands, and you're seeing on the video a single hand demonstration, and you might be wondering why. The recommendation generally is to begin practicing these hands separately because in most cases they are quite challenging to control if you've never done them before. So you will practice that control with one hand, and this is what participants tend to do at the beginning of their practice. Those who have more facility will often immediately do it with both hands. And so what you're seeing on stage is me doing it with both hands. You might notice how some of those methods modify the left hand as well, whether it's the rhythm of the left hand or dynamically, the left hand will have to be modified. Those modifications are all part of how these methods are done. Oops, sorry. And here is single, double single. Oh, let's try that again. Here's double single, and this one I find the most helpful. So between single, double, and double single, I think single double works better for this etude. But depending on the area of the etude that you're working on, both methods are applicable. Blocked practice is kind of fun because blocked practice is the act of playing all of the notes in one group as a single unit. And so when you're playing them as a single unit, you're hearing it as a harmony, assuming it makes a harmony. In certain circumstances, you might have too many passing notes or non-chord tones for it to sound like a harmony, but in those circumstances, what you're using this method for is to practice hand position. This is incredibly useful anytime that you have to do jumps. It's also very effective for just gaining control and recognizing where your hand is moving, gaining a sense of what your hand is supposed to do with the score. So often this is used early on in the learning process to improve harmonic recognition and train hand position. Now, this can be used in other sections of the etude, but one thing that is primarily used for passage work only is high finger. High finger is also called hammer touch. Sometimes it's called firm touch, and what it is the act of lifting each finger high and making sure that every finger has exactly the same attack, the same volume, the same sound. So the attack and the release have to be the same, and you don't want any overlapping between the notes. Now, this helps with coordination and dexterity as well as range of motion. So here you hear it. You might notice, out of all the methods, this one is the most mechanical. And there's a purpose for that. Part of the purpose is that in our practice, there are different stages. And this is something that each participant spoke about in passing. So they didn't directly mention this until I asked them further about it. But they all mentioned, well, it depends on what stage of practice I'm at. And depending on the stage that I'm at, I'll be doing different things. And so in my study, I have dubbed these 3 stages because every participant unanimously described them as 3 stages, with 2 participants saying that occasionally they think of the middle stage as being split into 2. So the stages are the learning stage, the middle stage, and the pre-performance stage. In the learning stage, what you're doing is you're learning notes, you're getting comfortable with them, you're learning rhythms. You're making sure that you just know your score, and you can play it with your hands. In the middle stage, you are starting to think a lot more about putting it together musically, thinking about how the piece is going to sound in performance and making changes in your practice that will affect that performance positively. And during the pre-performance stage, you are immediately before a performance, you've already made all of your choices. And what you're doing is a little bit different than what you've done in stages 1 and 2. I wanted to share those stages because what you're going to be hearing now are demonstrations from some of Nicholas Rada's students. So we've been lucky enough to have 3 of his students join us today, and we are going to hear them talk a little bit about these 3 stages as well as about the methods that they use. And so our very first performer today will be Nini Liu, and I'd like to welcome her to the stage. Come on up, Nini. Thanks very much, Nini. Thank you for playing. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm 14 years old. I've been playing the piano for almost 10 years, and I've been studying with Mr. Rada for about 6 years now.
Okay, all right, nice. And can you tell us a little bit about this piece? Because we know you're playing it under tempo. Tell us how long have you been working on this?
I've been working on this piece for around 2 weeks, and I need to get this ready for the summer.
Okay, amazing. So this is a brand new piece that you're playing for us. Okay, wonderful. So can you share how you use methods here if you use them?
Yeah, so I'll be demonstrating the passage from bar 23 to the end of 26. And the first method I normally start with is high finger. So this is going to be flat with no dynamics.
Okay. All right, nice, thank you. Can you tell us why you do that?
Yeah, so I normally start with this because it helps build consistency in my touch, so my attack and my release, and also builds like comfort with the notes in my fingers as well as the fingering. So just making sure everything's really consistent and staying the same.
Okay, amazing. Is there something else that you use?
Yeah, so I also use tap and hold specifically for this section. So
thank you very much. Can you tell us why you use that? Because this is a method that we haven't discussed yet, so.
Yeah, so when you're playing something fast, up to speed, you might hear there's like some inconsistencies in between the notes, so normally like holes or overlaps, and that's normally caused when your fingers don't release like properly, like they either release too early or hold for too long. So tap and hold just makes sure that release is very consistent between all of the notes.
Okay, all right, wonderful. What else do you use?
I use rhythms here, so dot rhythms.
Very nice. And I assume you do them in both directions?
Yes.
What's the point of that?
So this helps with my coordination and just making sure your rhythm is very consistent throughout.
Okay,
Yeah.
amazing. Anything else you would like to share with us?
Yes, so this section I also use picking.
Very nice. And I'm assuming that you prefer picking as opposed to plucking for a.
Yeah, just because this section typically has like a lighter touch, so when I'm performing, I hope that it's like really light.
Uh-huh.
Picking helps with that because you have to make sure you're starting from the key and also your touch is consistent, so you're not missing like any ghost notes or anything. So.
Okay. And for those who don't know what ghost notes are, because
Basically when you're like playing a note, but it's a lot softer than the others, or you just miss it. Like you press the key down, but there's no sound coming out. So.
okay, yeah. So ghost notes are basically when you don't go to the bottom of the key.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else you would like to share?
So for this section, I do groupings, which is stopping on 1, 2, 3, and 4s. But specifically for this section, I like to stop on 2s if I'm in a time crunch. So.
Very nice. Why do you prefer twos if you're in a time crunch?
Well, for this part, the second note of the 4 groupings, it falls on a weak beat, and it's also not on the main beat. So normally, when you're playing fast, that can get glossed over. So it's really important to make sure all the notes are played.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah. So right now I'm in the learning stage, moving on to the second stage for this piece, and I feel like it's really important to build methods practice in from the very beginning of your practice, more so as opposed to like when you're almost performing and that's when you're starting to use the methods. It's just to get more comfortable with the notes and to learn everything faster. So yeah.
Okay. And if you were to integrate them, do you integrate them later on as well or not?
I do. Like when things get messy before I'm about to perform, but normally pre-performance
Uh-huh.
I like to do slow-mo, which is like it applies for the whole piece and you can just make sure you have all your details and you know what you're doing for each section. So
Do you suppose you could show a little bit of slow-mo for us?
So,
If you'd like to start from the beginning to show how it works there, or possibly I think you'd mentioned starting from measure 10 before.
sure, I can show from measure 10.
And so I noticed you did that with dynamics.
Yes, so when you're practicing slow motion, I think it's important to do that with all your phrasings and your detail ideas, just to make sure you know everything and you know what you're doing and what's happening in between the notes as well.
So for me to understand correctly, when you're doing slow-mo practice, you are effectively playing it the way you want it to be in performance, but super slow. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Anything you'd like to add?
Oh, I think that's about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for demonstrating. Appreciate it. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nini. Appreciate the help. Let's have a little bit of Hannah's demonstration. So Hannah's playing cat and mouse, and she will be just playing a little bit of the first page in the opening. Yeah, sure, no problem. very much, Hannah. Beautiful performance. So let's talk a little bit about you. You and I know each other for a long time because we spent many years working together. But now you are a student of Nicholas's, yes? And tell us how old you are.
I'm 14.
Okay. And how long have you studied with Nicholas?
I've studied for him for about 2 years.
About 2 years, gotcha. And this piece, tell us about it. How long have you known it?
I've had it for 1 year, but I haven't always been working on it for the whole time.
And for people who don't know, this is a level 10 RCM piece, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So you've had this for about a year, and would you say this is the third practice stage that you're at now?
Yeah, so I'm preparing this for performance.
Okay, gotcha. Wonderful. Tell us a little bit about the methods that you use.
So, because there's a lot of jumping in this first part, you have to, it's really easy to miss it. So you have to start with like a part that is easy to nail down. So like, and then when you have that like thoroughly, you know you got that part. So then you can start adding little bits like, and then when you're done with that.
And so how would you name this method?
I think Mr. Rana calls it addition method.
Mhm.
So that's what I would call it.
Addition. And sometimes we refer to this as forwards and backwards practice as well, right? Are you going to show the backwards version that you like to do?
Yes, so sometimes I miss the last note really easily, so I would go back and just play that, and maybe I'd add a little bit, just so that I get used to like the end group, because it's really easy to just miss. Especially since you're doing the first half a lot more.
Gotcha. Okay. So instead of practicing the passage from the beginning to the end, you're practicing it from the end, doing the last segment or group the first time, then doing, let's say if you have group 1, 2, 3, 4, you'll be doing 4, then 3 plus 4, then 2 plus 3 plus 4, then 1 plus 2 plus 3. Is that correct? Yes. Perfect. Okay. Anything else that you do here?
Yeah, so, because it can get kind of slappy sometimes, so it's good to do some picking, which practices like, just to keep a lighter touch, so.
Okay. Very good. Thank you for sharing picking with us. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, not really for this piece. This part, that's mostly what I use.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, thank you very much for sharing.
Then I guess there's an alternating higher passage.
Okay.
Which I could also talk about. So this part, I also do picking, though I guess you would consider it more plucking. So it's like, because when it speeds up, you need a lot of that, like the popping motion of your hand. So it's good to practice like a pluck, because it helps with building that kind of
Control?
yeah.
Okay. Nice. Wonderful.
And then I also do like reverse dotted rhythm, because this is like on a strong beat, so it's hard. It's easy to like miss these parts.
So by reverse, sorry, you mean instead of long, short, you mean short, long? Oh, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. Okay.
And that helps me hear the weak beats too.
Okay. So you're spending more time on the weak beats.
Yeah, so then I can hear them.
Okay. Wonderful. So you're kind of building it into your ear by stopping or lengthening that note through rhythms.
Yeah, it can get kind of distorted when I don't really listen to the weak beats, so squashed and like crunched. So
You mean in normal playing, and it starts to feel crushed or crunched unless you do this. Okay. Well, that's very helpful to hear. Anything you would like to add?
no.
Well, thank you very much for coming up and demonstrating. It was beautiful playing. Okay, and last but not least, we will have Owen Q coming up. Chopin. So tell us a little bit about what you just played.
Yeah, of course. So this is Chopin's third ballade, and I've been playing it for about a year now.
Tell us about yourself. You are...
Yeah, I'm 16 years old, and I've been practicing with Mr. Rada for about 2 years now.
Okay, gotcha. And tell us a little bit about this piece. I know you said that you've been learning it for about a year, you're ARCT level, but you had said something to me the other day where you said, well, I'm still going through some things with this piece right now, right? So.
Yeah, I would say generally I'm at about between the second and third stages. I'm definitely fixing some memory slip issues, some inaccuracies, just cleaning those up just from some recent inconsistent practice times. Yeah, I'm in that process of trying to get myself back into that performance prep position.
So for us to know, this was at some point at stage 3, but then through a certain amount of I guess, moving on to other repertoire and maybe some neglected, moved backwards to stage 2, so we're working through stage 2 to 3 now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, tell us how you do that.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely like to work, I'm going to talk more specifically about this portion near the bottom of the page, from about measure 178 to about 182, the circle of fifths. I like to start with some slow-mo practice. I think it really helps me with some visual memory, which I find comforting while I'm playing, just being able to recognize my notes, recognize it, and kind of match that with the score in my memory, as opposed to kind of relying on muscle memory or auditory memory on its own.
Okay, can you show us a little bit of that? All right, very nice. Thank you very much. And so what other methods do you use here?
Something else I also use is grouping. I like to group by pretty much every group of fifth. And again, I think it does help with some control, some coordination, as opposed to just, because usually this part is played pretty quickly. It's supposed to be exciting, so I would really quickly barrel through it. But when I stop and I do groupings, it gives me a little bit of control. I can stop and start wherever I want to stop and start.
Okay, could you show us a little bit? Wonderful, thank you for sharing that. Anything else you'd like to add?
Oh yeah, one more thing, it's kind of along the same sort of line is I do something similar to Hannah. I do some backwards addition practicing. And I think it kind of builds off on my grouping practice. Again, with some control. Some being able to start wherever I want to start. Because usually you would play it forwards, you would play it from this part to this part, but when you play it backwards, you get to practice starting at every point, different points in a measure, and you build your way from the back, which is a lot different than what you might do in a run-through or normal practicing.
Go ahead when you're ready.
That's good, I'm gonna go. Keep going backwards addition like that.
Okay, amazing. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, yeah, I'm pretty good on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your demonstration. Beautiful playing. So I really want to thank all the students for coming up and showing their pieces in different stages. And for those of you listening, I appreciate you knowing that, as you already heard, students are at various performance stages with this, and so their performances reflect that. And normally, if you're in stage 1 or 2, you won't be coming up on stage, but we are very lucky to have some big, bold, brave students who are willing to demonstrate exactly how they work through the different things, the challenges that they encounter. So let's all give them one more round of applause for all their effort. So all of these methods are fundamentally not the only ones. They are the ones that these students are practicing, but when I spoke to teachers, I also heard some other methods that they use. And one of the teachers, Nikolai Andreevich, mentioned a very, very interesting one, which is doing something unrelated with one hand. So I will demonstrate a little bit of this. He had suggested doing a variety of different activities. In his preference, he prefers that the right hand or the left hand will play the music as it's normally written, expressively, while the opposite hand does something completely unrelated, like drawing. I will not be drawing. I will be playing a scale, which is another variation of this that he uses. So if I'm going to be playing my etude, just to give you a refresher on what it sounds like. And now I'll take that etude and do. You're hearing me play an F major scale with my left hand and the actual etude melody with my right, or rather, not the melody, it's in the left, but the right hand passage work. This is quite challenging to do. I would personally implement this through sections, although he did not specify his preferred implementation of this. He did, however, mention that he does like drawing with one hand or doing something completely unrelated more than playing scales because he finds that too easy. Elliot Fraser was another teacher who I interviewed who talked a little bit about learning difficult repertoire extremely quickly. So something that he does is he gives all of his students, regardless of level, some sort of challenging piece, and this can be something like the Waldstein that Nini was kind enough to play for us, and saying, go ahead and learn the first 2-3 pages of this today and send me a video. Or go ahead and learn it in 2 days and send me a video. And this really puts students under pressure to build the techniques that they need to do this extremely quickly. As a result, they experience a slightly different type of learning process, which pushes them towards a quicker improvement when it comes to easier repertoire as well. And then Ethan Westwood and Miles Thornton mentioned a method that they personally don't necessarily recommend using, but they did say that some of their teachers had mentioned this, and this was writing out the whole piece from memory. So sometimes it can be the piece, sometimes it can be a section. I personally have done this for fugal subjects or for other segments of repertoire where I can't exactly remember the melody or the harmonic structure. There are a number of different ways to do this. You can write it out as it's written. You can also write down a harmonic reduction of it, which is my preference, which I do occasionally do, where I will be writing exactly what the harmonic progression is without necessarily looking at change in register, but just looking at the passage as chords. Now, all of this gets integrated. It gets integrated with practice approaches. So as a reminder, practice approaches are generalized learning strategies that we use and apply across the different stages of practice and in cohesion with other principles that we're talking about here, particularly methods. So what are practice approaches? Well, practice approach is fundamentally first, the biggest practice approach is fundamentally breaking your practice into 3 stages. And stage 1 is the learning stage, stage 2 is the middle stage, stage 3 is the pre-performance stage that we talked about before. Now, within these stages, you will be applying specific practice approaches if you're following this method. And this is the method that the students have described. These are the approaches that they have described using. In the first stage of learning, you will be using segmentation and repetition. And as you heard from the students who came up today, you will also be using method practice during this stage. During the middle stage, you'll be doing contextualization and self-reflection. Now, we'll get into exactly what those things are shortly. And during the third stage, you are more likely to be doing things like practicing in your head, doing mental practice, and recording. Whether it's recording yourself or listening to recordings, both are used during the third stage. And it's worth mentioning that students who are particularly advanced will often have a blurring of the lines between these stages. So they might be doing contextualization already in stage 1, basically making use of elements of stage 2 very early if they have the facility to do this. Now, what is segmentation? Well, I've chosen another segment of this etude to show this. Segmentation can happen in small bits or large bits. So the etude that I'm playing, that I had demonstrated for you, was the F major etude, and there's a D minor section in the middle. Within that D minor section, there's modulatory passages and sequences, and those sequences themselves can be further segmented. So segmentation is usually the practice of taking a piece and splitting it into sections. And now, one of the most interesting and important elements is that everybody does this structurally, and they are looking at the format of the piece and building their pieces, their segments, according to the format. Meaning, if the piece is in sonata form, you're going to have segments organized according to thematic material. So you'll have theme 1 probably be its own segment, theme 2 be its own segment, development will be a segment. But likewise, you can subdivide those segments further, and this is why this is up here, because it's in the development section of this etude, but however, you can subdivide that development further into the sections that you see on the screen. So what you're seeing is the middle section, which is fairly challenging. And one of the things you can do in this section is practice that section alone. So that would be the first segment you would practice. That would be the second segment that you would practice. And you can practice that with methods. My personal favorite is block. I've sped that up just to show you that this would continue through the passage, but the principle is that you're playing each one of the hand positions as a single unit, so your hand knows exactly where to move to and you're not searching for notes. This type of segmentation will be used throughout practice, but primarily during the first stage. And it is used in combinations with methods like I've just shown. And you can see some of the segments that I've played bracketed off up on the screen here. Now, as you're practicing, of course, you're going to need to engage in repetition. But the question is, does practice make perfect? Not exactly. The thing with practice is that how you repeat really matters. And what we found, what I've discovered, is that students are practicing in very specific ways, particularly when it comes to repetition. They are practicing variety in their repetition. So they are not repeating the same thing 1,000 times. They are repeating it differently. And that offers them control and freedom. Freedom through control, through the ability to achieve a sense of control that then allows them to do what they want with it. And that leads to them being able to make spontaneous decisions on stage. This is an important point because students talked at length about the fact that when it comes to experiencing flow on stage, to getting into the zone, they want to have the facility to deal with whatever comes to them. One student, Noah, is 14, and he said this. He said that, I want to trust that the fingers will do what they want. And I try my best to listen as attentively as I can through repetition, in his repetitive practice, so that I can go with it during the performance. And that allows him, he said, to feel the emotions in the music and allows him to make spontaneous choices on stage while remaining connected with the music and letting it flow. Some other quotes about repetition from my study are on mindless repetition, because one topic that came up a lot was the idea that it's very easy to fall into the practice of just repeating because you're repeating. And that's not right, because mindless repetition, as Nikolai Andreevich said, puts you in a very bad place. And he wasn't the only one who mentioned this. This was mentioned by actually every teacher in the study, some of whom called this autopilot. So Ethan Westwood and Miles Thornton, as well as Nicholas Strata, called this reverting to autopilot, where you're no longer thinking and you're just playing with no thinking. And Nikolai Andreevich said, mindless repetition puts your brain to sleep and you start thinking about something else. So what happens during practicing with lots of repetition is your brain shuts off, and then you just automatically do things without thinking. On stage, the quality that you need the most is the absolute opposite of that. Your brain must be very alert, and it must make many quick decisions. So every time you repeat in your practice, you repeat doing something very different, challenging your brain constantly to figure things out. This all comes forward to the idea of contextualization. And Miles Thornton and Ethan Westwood said how to phrase, how to recognize the correct sound quality, as opposed to whatever just happens to come out of the piano. There's so many layers that we're trying to cover, so much of that, even if it's just a small portion of a given work, so that then, when we've done it all already in our house, in lesson, maybe by the time they get home, they can do the same thing again and take it further. So this is these two teachers who teach together talking about how it's very important for them in lessons with students that students will achieve the sound that they're going for, the thing that they're trying to fix in the lesson. And the purpose of this is so that they're not guessing what it is they're trying to get to. They're not just following theory, but they've heard it, they know what that feels like, and they are following that same feeling. Now, contextualization, as I mentioned before, is the idea of doing the things that you practiced in their small forms within the larger whole. Now, this can be practicing small segments and then taking the larger segment or section and working through that entire section again. This could also be playing through the entire piece, but most often than not with large repertoire, you're seeing smaller sections that people are taking and contextualizing within a bigger section like exposition, development, or recapitulation. So this allows them to practice integration of musical ideas and get from the small to the large, allowing them to see the forest through the trees and effectively perceive what the performance is going to be like. This also is a checking process. The students talk about how they use this contextualization as a means to see if what they've done with methods, what they've done with segmentation actually works. So they say, well, I might practice methods for a section and I'll do it 3 to 5 times, and I'll do it over 3 days, and then I'm going to contextualize that section, and I will run through a segment of it to determine if that's actually what's happening and if it's working, or if it sounds differently than I'd like it to sound because the practice method I've applied isn't getting me the results I want to achieve. And so here you can see that I'm showing a segment here that I would practice as a separate section, and that's highlighted in blue. And then what I'm showing here with the yellow is that I would actually go back to the yellow part to see if the problems that I have in measures 11, 12, 13, 14 will be fixed. And to check them, I'm going back to 8. I'm not starting at 11. For the sake of time, I will skip that demonstration. Now, all of this, contextualization in particular, allows students to maintain engagement and gets them to practice it. And Nicholas Rada was very specific about this, but so were the other teachers, commenting on how important it is that students commit to their previous ideas when they are practicing. So you're not practicing one way today and another way tomorrow, although you're practicing variation while you are working through repetition. When it comes to the contextualization stage and you're running through things, what you're really doing is you're making sure that you have a musical idea and you're following that thought. You're tracing the line of that musical idea from start to end, and it should feel like riding the wave. The way that Nicholas describes this is continuing the thought from the beginning to the end. And through the process of contextualization, you want to stay so musically engaged and mentally engaged with what you're doing that you are aware of everything that happens and exactly how you'd like it to sound. Now, to make that happen, it's so important to mitigate distractions. We all know that we have many distractions to deal with. In our practice, we have a controlled environment that we can actually impact, which means we need to do that. And students talked extensively about how distractions were a big part of their practice that they had to control. And they did this fundamentally by putting their phones away. Although that wasn't the only thing, that was the biggest distraction consistently. And there's a quote from Nikolai Andreevich that I liked, where he says, if you feel that there's a problem with focusing, 95% of the problem will be solved if you really set up chunks of time throughout the day where you don't touch any technology whatsoever. It's an extremely difficult thing to do because it really is a legitimate addiction. So this all leads to this principle of self-reflection. Students are doing so much in their practice that they're doing actually away from the piano. And this is the reflective aspect of their practice. Although they self-reflect within practice sessions at the piano, they're also doing this away from the piano and really considering whether the things that they are practicing are leading to the result that they want to achieve. So how do they do this? Well, by recording themselves is the biggest one. students all indicated they record themselves, and they record themselves at various stages in their practice. They also practice emotional association. So they make up stories. They talk about feelings and experiences that help them connect with the music. And they do this away from the piano and also at the instrument so that they can experience a feeling in their practice that they can pursue in performance. And of course, again, they do this by controlling the environment and making sure they are not distracted. This doesn't just mean no digital distractions. This also means that people take the time to set up their life to better work for them. I had one student, Noah, who said that he had to negotiate with his parents to practice either 10 p.m. to 12 a.m., which they didn't like, or 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., which he didn't like. Unfortunately, they won, so he was practicing 6 to 8 a.m., and now he's a morning person, but he certainly gets his hours in, and he manages to maintain that, that concentration in the morning. When I asked him, you know, why he didn't push on 10 to 12, besides the fact that his parents have the last say, he said, actually, I tried the 6 to 8, and I had fewer distractions. Because at 6 in the morning, there aren't going to be any dogs barking, any people walking by, everybody's sleeping, and it's just me and my piano. Now, why do people do this? So that they have control, and they're able to maintain mental flexibility. Without this amount of self-reflection, they're not going to be able to achieve their goals. It does take a student-teacher team to get here, but there's a lot that students have to do on their own in their time alone. And this self-reflection helps them structure their future practice sessions. So one of the things that students were saying was, one student said, Rita said, one of the biggest things that I achieved over the last few weeks, I achieved while on a walk. She said, I went to get a coffee with my friend after sitting in a practice room for 2 hours. And it was sunny and it was beautiful, and that had made me feel a certain way. And the section that I was playing just before I came outside started playing in my head, and I realized how it should sound. And from there, I was able to go and actually repeat that in the practice room. So she sings her repertoire in her head, or it comes to her and she hears it in her head during her walks, and she makes choices with that material, with that reflection, that impact how she practices and how she performs. Of course, this all ties in with training instincts, getting to a point where people know how they want to react on stage. And what they're doing in this second stage of practice is they're teaching themselves what the most appropriate reactions are to different stimuli. And that leads us to performance preparation techniques, which is the last thing. The behavior is practiced immediately before performances. Now, recordings were one of the things that people did. They recorded themselves, but they also listened to other people's recordings for inspiration. And this is important because they're not always listening, they're usually not listening to copy. What they say is they often listen to things they like and dislike, so they can determine what things they dislike in other people's playing. They're also self-recording for reflection, watching those recordings, and making changes in their practice regularly. And then, when they feel ready to play through the piece, they record themselves for an element of stress. And that element of what they call positive stress allows them to experience performance-like atmospheres. Marvin talks a little bit about this, saying there's kind of a feeling of connecting with a real human being, which you don't get when you're playing into a phone. And so besides recording, students do something else. They do run-throughs. And this is significant because every single participant, teachers and students in this study, said run-throughs are critical to performance success and achieving optimal performance. Performing is ultimately a unique experience. We can't completely predict it, ever. It gives us a sense of positive stress to do these things called run-throughs. Run-throughs are the behavior of publicly performing to a miniature audience, oftentimes to a fairly private audience, and sometimes completely by yourself to a phone, like Marvin mentioned, although most people consider this less effective than playing for friends and family. And this is done to train how they will react to unusual circumstances. The piano misbehaving, someone coughing in the back of the room, the lights working funny, or whatever else the problem might be. One student, Polly, said that walking up to the piano and bowing and treating the run-through like a performance allows her to really get into that state. She said that she often starts doing run-throughs by herself on her own, and eventually will invite her family, like her mom and her sister, to do it a couple of times before she feels ready to go and play in front of others. When it's time to play in front of others, students do something called a short-term performance routine. And the short-term performance routine is almost ritualistic. The reason for that is that people are shifting their priorities, and the biggest one is conservation of energy. So you're seeing on the day of the performance, or maybe in the coming days leading up to it, a lot more napping, a lot more focus on nutrition, making sure you get enough calories, enough food. A lot of the time people are cutting caffeine. Stress management, people don't take on stressful activities. They really watch how much they put themselves out there in most cases, although there are students like Andrea who said they prefer to hang out with friends right on the day of the performance so they don't feel the impending anxiety that they otherwise experience. The rest of 6 out of 7 students all said they prefer to keep to themselves. Everyone, except one student, Marvin, engages in minimal practice. Marvin, however, prefers to do a full 5 hours on the day of the performance. Somebody like Noah prefers to do a full warm-up routine but no run-throughs. And it's very common among all participants that run-throughs are kind of a taboo on the day of the recital. All of this leads to emotional preparation. They don't want the feelings associated with, oh no, this section didn't go well, this section did. Instead, you're really focusing yourself on believing that everything will be going well and on kind of centering and feeling physically prepared. So how do participants describe optimal performances? Well, they say that it's like flying. One of the teachers who spends most of her time performing internationally has said that nothing really feels like a real performance, and it just feels like all time slips away and she feels like she's flying. Nikolai Andreevich said it's the most joyful experience, and students who don't like performing, he feels that they're really missing out, and if they were to apply the correct approach, they would be able to experience a kind of joy that can't be found elsewhere. And Nicholas Rada considers it a deeply engaging experience, something that takes all of you. And Brian calls it being fully locked in. Rita says that she feels like she's calm, she's not overthinking when she's on stage, and she's letting things happen and reacting to them. Here's a quote by her where she says, "Everything feels right. I can take as much time as I want when I'm playing, knowing that it's not going to be too much. In the moment, I feel like I have a full prediction of what the story is going to be or the sound is going to be like, and then I feel comfortable with spending time. Time passes slower, and I'm more aware of every millisecond because it sounds right. I'm aware of my body as well, and getting tense stuff doesn't really happen. Generally, I can be fully engaged if I'm really, really, really know a piece, where I already know everything I'm trying to do before it. So even if things happen that I don't expect, I can give my full attention to reacting to the things that happen in the moment because I already know everything else." So if you recall me saying training instincts, Rita's effectively saying, well, I have the instincts to do everything else, and now I can give my attention to the unexpected. Flow and optimal performance looks like being extremely prepared, and it requires calculated preparation, which we explored today. It also requires the skills necessary to react to unexpected events, all because it's deeply exhausting as well as deeply consuming, and you feel drained after that performance. It takes all of your energy. So there are some important takeaways from this study, and these takeaways, number one, is that challenge and skill is something that's balanced by a team, by both the students and the teachers. It takes collaboration. The students need to know what the end goal is that the teacher would like them to achieve, and the teachers need to know what the students' experience is in the process of achieving these goals. Effective practice sessions are planned. We know that for a fact. They are not accidents, they are planned and they are predictable. Although students in the study practiced in very varying amounts of time. So Rita prefers 2 to 3 hour long practice sessions, whereas Polly and Andrea practice significantly longer. One participant said, Polly said that she likes to practice 8-hour days. Now, she doesn't count each, she does rather count each one of the times that she sits at the piano, regardless of any getting up, as part of her practice time. She also counts mental practice as part of her practice time, but her practice length is extended. Regardless of whether you practice 2 hours or 8, you have to have some sort of routine that is specific to you. And that all leads to being able to achieve automatization, which is the act of being in control of the situation and reacting to unexpected stimuli. This is done through methods And what we've learned is that this detailed self-reflection that's present in practice, even through methods practice, leads to flow in performance through this trained reactivity and through the practiced run-throughs. And as a result, through this process of preparing in stages, you end up with the most unique performance experience at the final stage. So this leads to the question: does flow in practice mean flow in performance? Sort of. All of these elements work together: performance methods, performance approaches, and performance preparation techniques. Although flow in practice doesn't happen all the time, it happens at the final stage. What we know is methods are fundamental elements of deliberate practice that these students execute. But that part's not always fun. Instead, performance is a multi-stage process, and when you get to that final stage, that requires evolution and reflection to effectively achieve flow. So all of that is interconnected. Stage 1, you engage in deliberate practice via methods. Stage 2, you integrate, contextualize, and prepare for the flow experience. And stage 3, you're actively practicing flow through run-throughs, through sitting down in front of other people, recording yourself, and putting yourself on the spot as if it's a real performance experience. Of course, this study has its limitations. We had a small group of participants. There's a certain interconnectedness of these participants, which might explain the similarity in the names across methods. And of course, interviews are lengthy. I did 28 hours of interviews, and I'm sure that there are things that were missed because I had participants later reach out to me and say, I just realized I missed a practice method, and I didn't mention it, but I actually use it. Now, that wasn't included because that wasn't part of what they said in their interviews, but it's worth keeping in mind that practice methods are things that people use throughout their practice, and if they're not consciously actively using them now, they might not remember mentioning them. Of course, it's worth considering whether other participants, other instrumentalists, and non-pianists might practice the same way. It's also worth conducting quantitative research and seeing how much time people spend practicing methods. We might want to find out whether musicians, pianists particularly, playing other genres of piano music are engaged in this kind of practice, and other communities of musicians, whether they use methods or they don't. We might even ask if other primary teachers might lead to different methods, and whether non-pianists practice the same way as pianists when it comes to methods practice. It's worth remembering what we've learned, though, that pianists use specific methods to approach problem areas, and that these methods are how pianists practice deliberate practice to help induce flow on stage. And with that, I would like to thank you all for being here, for listening to my lecture on this, and I hope that you have happy practicing. May you feel flow in your performances, and may you use practice methods in your practice. Thank you for joining me.